Hello, welcome to what is going to be the start of our Chapter 2 material. Chapter 2 talks about two different civilizations, those civilizations found in Mesopotamia, that is in the ancient Middle East, and also the civilization found in Egypt. Now we will split Chapter 2 into two separate tests, two separate units. But both of them deal with a region of the world which we refer to as the Fertile Crescent. Okay, so you can see here on our screen, we have both Egypt and Mesopotamia, are two sections that we're going to talk about, but both of them belong to this area called the Fertile Crescent. And as you can imagine, it's called the Fertile Crescent because it is crescent-shaped, sort of C-shaped, right, like this, and because it's displays an extremely good amount of fertility. This is a place where agriculture could really take off in the ancient world. And you might be able to guess based on looking at this map, but the reason why the Fertile Crescent was so fertile has everything to do with these rivers that we see strategically located in them. For Mesopotamia, we see the Euphrates River and the Tigris River. And then in Egypt, we have the Nile. Okay, so these rivers were the source of fertility for these two civilizations, and they created this region that we call the Fertile Crescent. The Fertile Crescent is often referred to as the cradle of civilization because this is where the earliest human civilizations developed. Okay, the slide here gives you a little bit more explanation about what areas we talk about, but I mean, you can see them here on the map. It's basically the Persian Gulf area to the eastern coast of the Mediterranean Sea. It includes such modern-day countries as Iraq and Kuwait, Syria. You can read the list there. I'll never ask you for what those modern cities are, or modern states are. But I will ask you these two things. The first off is what the meaning of the word Mesopotamia is. Mesopotamia is from two Greek words, meso, which means middle, and potamos, which means river. So in Greek, Mesopotamia means the middle river place, the place between rivers, the land between rivers. And you can see that here, right? This region in between the Tigris and the Euphrates is what we call Mesopotamia, the between river land. Okay. The other thing you need to know is, what is Mesopotamia like? Mesopotamia is basically a big, flat plain. With very few natural defenses or barriers. It's an extremely flat area of land. And this is going to have a big impact on how we talk about Mesopotamia later in the class. We're going to see that this flatness with no defenses becomes a really big issue for the Mesopotamians in lots of different ways. So we want to keep that in mind when we're learning about this region called Mesopotamia. Why is this such a big deal? Well, those lack of barriers mean that we get lots and lots of increased interaction between people, both positive interaction like trade, but also negative interaction like warfare. Because it's very easy for people to move around in Mesopotamia, that means you have very easy interaction, lots of cultural diffusion happening, for better or for worse. So civilizations that take off in Mesopotamia are going to really show us a lot of good cultural diversity, cultural diffusion happening because of that geography. The rivers really play a huge role in the lives of the people living in Mesopotamia. We already know that rivers are super important. We saw that in chapter 1. But specifically, the way that the rivers impact the people in Mesopotamia here is because these rivers, unlike some rivers, are very unpredictable, very dangerous, and they flood often. Now, flooding is typically a good thing for rivers. When rivers flood, they deposit that silt that you can use then for farming. Okay, so flooding is not in itself a bad thing, because generally humans learn how to control that flooding through things like irrigation projects and building dams, stuff like that, right? They can work on the river to make sure that the river does not get too destructive. Okay? The problem, though, that we see in Mesopotamian culture, however, is that unlike many rivers, which have a very regular very predictable flooding season. The rivers in Mesopotamia were very unpredictable. You never were really quite sure when they were going to flood. And that unpredictability, if it catches you by surprise, would lead to potentially destruction of your city, destruction of all your hard work, right? If you plant all your crops and you're not expecting another big flood, but then a huge flood comes and basically drowns all those crops, now all your hard work is ruined. Okay, so the unpredictable nature of the flooding of the rivers is one of the key things you have to keep in mind when you're thinking about what life is like in Mesopotamia. They needed these floods to happen. If the floods didn't happen, they wouldn't have agriculture, right? But because the floods are unpredictable, that leads to a sort of love-hate relationship, right? The people of Mesopotamia are dependent on these rivers. They need these rivers, but at the same time, they kind of hate these rivers because at best, they're a source of lots and lots of extra work that the Mesopotamians have to do to keep them in control, right? They have to work extra hard to make sure that the rivers are stayed in control. But in a worst case scenario, those rivers flood despite all of your hard work and destroy everything that you do. So this ends up creating a very pessimistic viewpoint in the minds of the Mesopotamians. They are very negative in their outlook because imagine if everything you did in life and your entire means of survival could all of a sudden be ripped out from under you in an instant because of some natural disaster that you can't control, right? This small little factor in how their geography shapes their lives creates an entirely special, unique viewpoint in their civilization that extends into everything they do, almost. When you look at their literature, for instance, they talk about flood stories all the time. And the stories they tell are usually about these floods that are happened for very cruel reasons, okay? So the literature reflects this pessimistic attitude, and the pessimistic attitude is caused by the geography. Now, we're going to be talking about lots of different groups that are all in Mesopotamia, because unlike some of the other cultures that we're going to talk about, like Egypt, for instance, which is one civilization inside of a specific region, Mesopotamia is a region that is known for many different civilizations that share a lot of similarities, but have all different characteristics. And in addition to that, they all have different rulers. So this is a sort of cartoon depiction of some of the guys that we're going to be talking about in our textbook, Sargon, Hammurabi, Ashurbanipal, and Gilgamesh. We're not going to talk about them in that order, but we're going to talk about all four of these guys and the different civilizations that they were in charge of. Okay, and we're going to start in Sumeria, but we'll do that next time. So we'll leave off for now. We'll leave this as a little introductory video, and when we pick up next time, we'll talk specifically about the city-states of Sumer, which is going to coincide with Chapter 2, Section 1 of our textbook.